This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
He's Greg, I'm Nick. It's the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the app today. Use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Also, you can take the guesswork out of buying NBA or NFL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Before we jump into minicamp and some other headlines across the NFL, Greg, your thoughts? Celtics up 2-0 in the NBA Finals against the Mavericks. Game 3 tomorrow night in Dallas.
Yeah, a couple thoughts I had. I mean, really the way it's played out so far is sort of what we talked about going into the series. I just thought that the Celtics had way more ways to beat the Mavs than the inverse, and that is sort of held. Kyrie has been a big zero, and I don't think it's just, him and the Celtics and the Garden crowd and stuff like that. I think the Celtics know how to defend them. I think their plans defending in this series against both him and Luka have been tremendous. I think the difference in the series is the way that the Celtics defend 1 through 5, especially when Porzingis is out there. We'll have to see, how much he plays going forward. If at all, that could be a big factor in the series. But look, the bottom line is if Kyrie doesn't get hot and, maybe going back home helps him and he can carry that back into a possible Game 5 in Boston and all that, the Mavs have no hope. Like, it can't just be Luka and a bunch of these other slappies that are out there that are doing nothing and can't hit water if they fell out of a boat. So, I mean, it feels like the series is over, but I'm allowing for, Kyrie to get hot. One thing I don't understand, Nick, and I'll be interested to get your thoughts on this, is like, look, Luka has a lot on him. We know he does. He's not the best conditioned athlete in the world. Like, I don't understand having him bring the ball up. And, whether it's Holiday or Jaylen Brown picking up full court, like, it's just taking that much more steam out of him. Like, why aren't they having Kyrie run the point and sort of maybe that will get him into more of a rhythm? But, right now, Game 2 was the opening for the Mavs to steal, just like every other series, where the Celtics seem to, in Game 2, have sort of a letdown, don't shoot as well. They're typical, like, they keep shooting threes and they can't hit threes. And normally they lose that game, and that Dallas didn't win that game, and they did make a late run, and it got pretty hairy there for a while, which isn't great. But at the end of the day, it was a pretty comfortable win for the Celtics, and that Dallas couldn't steal that game is a bad omen for them going forward.
The Kyrie thing, this is a trend, and this is what I keep pounding, whether I'm on 98.5 doing the post game on Sunday night, or I'm doing my podcast or here with you. 12 straight losses, and people look at 12 straight losses versus the Celtics for Kyrie, and they just remember that number. But it's also the fact that he's been so inefficient against the Celtics through that stretch. He's shooting, if he's fortunate, 40% from the floor. He's shooting like less than 30% from three through that 12-game stretch. And that's why I don't buy that it's just the crowd that's bothering him, because he's had issues away from TD Garden against the Celtics. And I think it's the amount of bodies they throw at him. It's the size they can throw at him with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum from time to time. And he just feels uncomfortable. And then he tries to go hero ball because he knows what's going on. It's in his head. And so now he starts to shoot like he did in the second half on Sunday night and just take a number of bad shots in that game in the second half where he was just trying to get his. And so if you get him thinking that way, then you're going to have success. As far as Luka, I think it's just making him do as much as humanly possible. And one guy is not going to beat you, as special as Luka is offensively. They're making him defend. They're calling for the switches. They're forcing him to defend Tatum and Brown and everybody else on this team. His defense is not good enough. And if you want him to try to be better defensively, that's going to take away from him offensively. So I don't see how he can ramp up his defensive attention to detail, energy, and effort when you're asking him to score at least 30 to 35 on a nightly basis. The other guys, I mean, Greg, you looking at the game on Sunday night, P.J. Washington had 17, Gafford had 13, Derrick Jones Jr. had 11, Luka had a 32-point triple-double, and the Celtics shot 25% from three, and they dominated most of that game. That can't make you feel good if you're Dallas. However, I do agree with you. I think some people are going a little too far with this series is over. The Celtics in the big picture, they defended home court. Now let's see what Dallas does back in Dallas tomorrow night. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't put past, Kyrie to have at least one or two hot games in this series. You still have to deal with Luka, and we'll see how Porzingis comes together over the next, 24 hours. So I don't think the series is over, but I do think it's a monumental challenge for Dallas to win 4 out of 5 and win the title.
100%.
All right, let's jump to some football here. Aaron Rodgers. Let's start there. He was a no-show at Jets minicamp, and the way it was termed, Greg, was that he's away for an event that is quote important to him, unquote. What to make of this?
I just couldn't help but chuckle. I mean, we got into these discussions, and I even got into it the other day after practice. I was stopped in and said hi to Christian Fourier and Gresh because they were there broadcasting, and Fourier and I were talking. He was wondering about, the win total, and, I'm still I expect the team to get near or around 7 wins. And, we've talked about the reasons for that, but everybody looks at the daunting schedule, but you don't know what you're going to get out of the Jets. You don't know what you're going to get out of Aaron Rodgers. And, I'm just not ready to just solidly be all right, well, we're going to get prime Aaron Rodgers and the Jets are going to be really tough. I'm not ready to do that by any stretch. And this is just another example why. I mean, I assume the New York media, being the New York media, they are going to try their damnedest. Hopefully there's some social media leakage on what exactly this important event for Aaron Rodgers is. It could be some sort of vaccination conference or something, or, from what we know about his past, it's certainly not a family reunion. He doesn't have a family, he doesn't have a wife, he doesn't have kids. So you're really limited. I mean, hopefully everybody's okay and there isn't some sort of, but they said it's unexcused. So what I find interesting about this, Nick, is that last year the Jets went out of their way to make Aaron Rodgers comfortable, never criticized him, anything. Yep. And Saleh comes out and he makes it a point to say it's an unexcused absence. That's just a stark change. And now now because of how sensitive Aaron Rodgers is, when that gets back to him, how's he going to react to that? What's that going to cause him to do or not show up for? And so the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, they are just, it's nonstop drama with them. And the guy who talked about we need to leave the BS off the field and we need to be all about business. I mean, he can't even make it to mandatory minicamp. I mean, so if anybody is afraid of the Jets and what they might do to the Patriots this year and how that might affect the Patriots and their schedule, just slow your roll on that, because it's a long ways to go for the Jets to prove that they are an altogether good outfit.
The other part of this is that Hassan Reddick also a no-show at minicamp, and the Jets traded a 3rd-round pick for that guy. He's unhappy with his contract. They've obviously been unable to work out a contract. I believe I saw Robert Saleh say a week or two ago that he hadn't even spoken to Reddick yet. So that's also an interesting situation that is developing on the defensive end for the Jets. Not the greatest start for them. All right, let's talk about the Patriots now. Matthew Judon was on the Rich Schertenlieb show this morning with your buddy Mike Giardi. Did not sound like Judon is planning on holding in. I thought he said all the right things. He wants to focus on football. He said the way he handled things last year was trash, which was interesting. Yep. So he's back at mandatory minicamp, and it sounds like he's going to be a full participant, and he's going to be there for this team.
Yeah, I found his comments about, how he handled last year. And of course, while we were saying that he's holding in, he's saying he's not holding in, that there's nothing with his contract. And, of course, we got blowback from the fans of that, you guys are making stuff up. And now all of a sudden, Judon basically admits that he held in last year and
Yeah.
he wasn't happy with it. I do wonder if and I don't know if he touched on this, and I know Giardi for BSJ, wrote something on this, and I read the quotes, but I don't know what else like Mike didn't quote. But I do wonder if the regime change might have changed Judon's outlook, where basically, at least the latter stages of Bill Belichick, if you wanted movement on your contract, you needed to go to war with him. And this goes
Right.
back to, Vince Wilfork and others, and Logan Mankins, when, he got tagged, he held out half the year, and then, and then he ended up getting paid. And so I wonder if Judon sees what they've been doing on the contract front and feels a little bit better about it, that he's like, I don't have to go to war with these guys to get, they'll either pay me or they won't. And like, me being aggressive isn't going to change that. So I do wonder if that factors into it a little bit.
I'd imagine they're talking at some level, just going off of how Elliott Wolf and Drake Maye have handled business so far. They want to keep their good players in New England. So I wouldn't be surprised that they've had some conversations. But I also think it's a delicate negotiation, because Judon has his side, and you can debate his side. He's a highly productive edge player. He's one of their best defensive players. He's one of the best players on this roster. And he is absolutely severely underpaid when you look at the contract versus some other guys at his position. The Patriots, though, Greg, they also have a good argument on their side, which is you're in your early 30s. You're coming off of a biceps injury. You had surgery. You missed a lot of last year. We're not necessarily willing to give you a 3 or 4 year big time contract given those circumstances. So to me, the question is, can they meet in the middle?
Yeah, I agree. And, his contract is a little complicated, with what they did last year. Like, he already has, part of his cap number is basically 15 million. It's the highest on the team. So it would behoove them to do something, even adding on a dummy void year, give him some more money up front. And I think that's what they probably end up doing. And some sort of, he has a void year in 2025. Could they add another void year in 2026? But, he already has $8 million in prorated signing bonus as part of his cap money. So, I mean, really, the only thing he's really getting this year is $7.5 million. Hopefully they find a way to bump that up to, somewhere around, 11 million for the year, add on a dummy year. I mean, it would give them more cap space. So it would probably be the smart thing to do. And I expect them to do something. It's either that or they trade him and decide to move on, which we've talked about, that, if once you get to training camp, you see guys with pads on, you're like, all right, well, between Uche and Anthony Jennings and Keon White standing up now, basically like operating only as an edge guy. Dietrich Wise does some of that stuff. Do they have some other options to bring in? Like, do they decide to move on from Judon? So I think it's either he's here under some sort of dummy extension that gets them a little bit more money, gives them a little cap relief, or they decide to, move on and make it somebody else's problem.
We'll continue with the contract negotiation talk. Devon Godchaux, last year of his deal, he didn't do anything yesterday at mandatory minicamp. Is he officially a hold-in, Greg?
I would think so. I mean, with the way he acted, I mean, he seemed to finish the season relatively healthy. It was, very odd. He basically didn't even have a uniform on. I think his helmet was around. He watched a lot of stuff. I mean, but I think, when we get to, when you talk about, our guys holding in, you have to look at guys who are going into the final year of their deal, or guys who don't have much guaranteed money. Gochaux fits into both. I mean, Judon is in that position. He took part. Dietrich Wise is in that position. He took part. Jabril Peppers, same sort of thing. the two guys who didn't were Devon Godchaux and Jonathan Jones that are in that same sort of bucket going into the final year of the deal. Now, Jonathan Jones, we know, hasn't been healthy, and that he wasn't even on the field signifies to me that he's rehabbing, doing that sort of thing. But, that Godchaux isn't doing anything, and I'm sure he looks at, the money that they're giving out, including to Christian Barmore, who he plays next to, who got a big extension. I'm sure that Gochaux has no guaranteed money left. He looks at, I'm the only nose tackle on this team. They didn't even draft anybody. They really need me. I do think that he's holding in, trying to prove a point, and it'll be interesting to see once we get to camp how much he does and when. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It is the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. Just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With PrizePicks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. Seriously, I did it before. I was like, I did some on the golf recently. That was fun, watching along. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat predictions on Tuesdays, which increases your chances of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Friday. This week on PrizePicks, I'm really into the hockey, and the NBA is kind of a snooze. Go Celtics. Can't wait to watch you guys against Kyrie. This week on PrizePicks, I'm looking at the hockey board, selecting Gustav Forsling over 1.5 shots on goal. Sam Bennett, hated in Boston, over 4 hits. Alexander Barkov, over 0.5 assists. That's easy. That's like taking money from a baby. And Chris Kreider, over 2.5 shots on goal. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first match deposit up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
One last contract tidbit that we wanted to cover here. Ramondre Stevenson surprised some of you at practice yesterday, saying that he's pretty close on an extension with the team. What would you think of a Ramondre Stevenson contract extension, Greg?
I'm fine with it. I mean, I think he's a really good player. He's a really good two-way player. As we talked about, he came into camp trimmed down. He says he hasn't lost a ton of weight. He more like redistributed it, and I think it's more of a maybe getting his body composition better, maybe losing some of the fat. I think he's probably lost some body fat and upped his strength. I mean, he looks great, and he looks quicker on the field. And as long as it's reasonable at running back, I'm not opposed to it. That the Patriots didn't draft anybody at the position. They brought in some undrafted guys. That's sort of a signal that they're, moving forward. But yeah, he's done all the right things. He's been a good player here. As long as it's reasonable, then I'm fine with it.
I'm with you. I don't want it to be a long-term deal. If they can get something like a 2-year extension done, maybe at the most a 3-year extension done at reasonable money. And I think reasonable money would be somewhere around $9 to $10 million on the AAV. When you look at the Saquon Barkleys of the world, he's at like $12.5 million. CMC just signed that contract extension with San Francisco. That gives him $19 million AAV. Derrick Henry's making $8 million with his deal in the offseason. I think DeAndre Swift's another guy who makes about $8 million. So if you can get him around that $8 to $10 million mark, that range, it makes sense. And it goes back to Wolf and Mayo wanting to keep their good football players. He is their best offensive player right now on the roster. You hope that Jalen Polk and Drake Maye and some of those other guys outplay him eventually. But right now, the given is Ramondre Stevenson with this offense. So I think it would make sense as long as they don't extend themselves too much.
Yeah,
David Andrews.
One thing I wanted to say on that, like sort of in the range, so Antonio Gibson, they signed him to a 3-year deal. Basically, his APY is $4 million. You look at the top backs, there's basically you have McCaffrey, Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Barkley, Josh Jacobs at like $12 million and up. And then it drops down to Joe Mixon at about 10, Derrick Henry at 8, DeAndre Swift at 8. Like I would be interested to know, like, would the Patriots go to 10? I think you can make the argument that he fits in there. I think that would be about my ceiling. If Stevenson's looking for more than that, I might have an issue. But I think I would love to get him at 8, and if he wants a little longer deal, at 8, I might be doing that. But I think 10 would be my ceiling.
All right, let's get to David Andrews. David Andrews talked about the offensive changes recently. He said, quote, "I remember meeting with AVP early in the offseason and then sitting down with Scott after that." He's talking about Scott Peters, offensive line coach. I was excited. I was excited to be part of this. I had to learn some of the things AVP was talking about doing. It was so different for me, but I love the game. I love the challenge. Getting to see that side of it has been really fun. Fresh starts are good, and there'll be a fresh start for people for different reasons. I'm excited. Your takeaway from those comments?
Yeah, I've been a big proponent of, I think, change is a good thing. And I think that, when you talk about David Andrews in the center position and the different things that he's talking about, in this scheme, traditionally, the center has a lot on his plate, where it used to be in the Patriots system, it was basically the quarterback was directing everything. Here it's very center focused. The center has a lot to do with, the line calls and things like that, and adjustments. So I'm sure it's a different challenge for David, but I'm certain it's one that's in his wheelhouse. And if I'm a guy like him, sort of a veteran coming to the end of the line, who's always been a very good player and a very cerebral player, this would be a really exciting thing for me, that it's challenging me at this point in my career. And I think that, he's going to be instrumental in, whether it's Jacoby Brissett or Drake Maye for the next year or two or what have you. I think that I could see him being excited. I also like, that he mentioned Scott Peters, because that's one of the big question marks for me on this team, on whether he's ready for that role. And not that David is endorsing him, but that, that they're engaging with him and it seems to be a partnership. I think that's a really good thing.
Let's jump to minicamp practice now. Overall, defense basically dominating in team periods, Greg.
Yeah, not a big surprise. This time of year, especially, it was, when the running game isn't as much of a factor. There was a lot of situational stuff. There was some red zone stuff. I thought that, when it came to team stuff, the situational stuff, basically there were like 6 or 7 drives, and the offense really only got like 1 field goal from Jacoby Brissett. And I will say the offense largely took care of the ball really well, outside of Bailey Zappi's pick 6 to Kyle Duggar. But, with a veteran group in the same scheme, even missing like, a lot of key guys not on the field, like Josh Uche and Jonathan Jones, it's not a surprise that the defense dominated when you're going up against an offense with a bunch of new parts and new coaches and a new scheme and things like that. And so, it was good to see the defense perform. It's good to see the offense, feeling a little bit of pressure and needing to be better. And, I'm sure they will be going forward.
Not surprised. I mean, this defense was top 10 in DVOA last year. You got Judon and Gonzalez out there from time to time now, working with them as well. DeMarcus Covington, as you mentioned, Greg, there's a lot of, fluidity to that side of the ball because those guys have been around for a while. They know each other, so the chemistry is there. Offensive turnover has been huge during this offseason. I think sometimes people overlook how many changes were made because we're so into the day-to-day minutia of this move and that move. But big picture, 30,000 feet, there's just so much dramatic change on that side of the ball. And I'm just talking about personnel, not even talking about the scheme, which is a complete change. So, and you have a rookie quarterback, which we'll get into in a minute. His snaps are progressing. He's having more and more snaps as time goes on now. and you have to allow him to kind of get through the transition and his progression from the college level to the NFL level. Speaking of the quarterback situation, Greg, is this officially now a 2-horse race?
Ooh, good question, Nick. I don't think it is quite yet, but I do, with Drake having more and more success each time he gets out there, which you love to see. I'm now open to that possibility. I'll be very interested to see what happens on Wednesday because, it's the final practice before the break, before they get back to training camp. And Drake's been doing a good job. We'll talk about some of the circumstances and the context that go into that. But it would not be a surprise to me if we get out there on Wednesday and we do see at least a series of snaps, what have you, where Drake is with the starters against the starting defense. I think that's sort of the next measuring stick for him because, largely, he's playing with backups with the twos. He's largely going against twos on defense. So that's, part of the context I was talking about, but that he's at least holding his own so far. If I'm one of the coaches, then I'm intrigued to say, like, let's see what the kid can do, with better weapons, with the better line against the better defense. Let's see what happens and sort of go from there.
We all understand that it's early. It's June 11th when we record this. Only watched one day of mandatory minicamp. So we have to keep this stuff in perspective. But I look at the big picture, and it's rather obvious to me, reading what all of you guys write down there and, the men and women that are covering the beat and the tweets that I see and all, it's rather obvious that Maye has made some progression here. And he has taken steps, some of them baby steps. But when you start collecting baby steps, they become bigger steps. And I just look at the snaps. Brissett got 30 snaps yesterday, got 30 reps, and Maye got 29. So now all of a sudden, Bailey Zappi is a distant third. Joe Milton is, hey, when we can get him on the field, we'll get him on the field from time to time. And Maye is slowly creeping up on Brissett as far as snaps go, which would tell me, and I'm just a layman for the most part, but it would tell me that the coaching staff likes what they've seen from Drake so far, and he's earning more trust. And what you just said makes a lot of sense, Greg. That next step in the trust process is, okay, now you get to go against the big boys at practice. now you get a series against the ones, and we see how you react to that. Your thoughts, though. Yesterday's practice, I saw, Tom Curran called Drake Maye outstanding. I believe it was Mark Daniels said that Drake Maye was fire today. Andrew Callahan was a little bit more tempered and said that he thought it was a good day for Maye. Phil Perry was pretty much impressed, said he was the best quarterback on the field yesterday. What'd you make of Drake Maye's first mandatory minicamp practice?
I'm probably somewhere in the middle of all those guys. First of all, if you catch me doing a fire emoji after practice, I might have done that once, maybe with Mac Jones. But anyways, look, I thought it was a good practice. I will say, I think a lot of the hyperbole about his performance came in his 7-on-7 red zone work where he threw 3 passes, he threw 3 interceptions. And I will say it was extremely impressive. The ball was out on time. His mechanics looked really good. He was tight. The ball was thrown perfectly. Like I said, with great timing and touch. It was really impressive. That being said, again, part of the context that I think is important, and this is why, I just don't throw out like stats, because I think you could take all that stuff is in the eye of the beholder. I think it takes the context out of it, and I think it's important, and certainly the eye test. I think so we've seen Drake Maye now in 4 practices plus I think rookie minicamp. What I would say to this point is what I know about Drake Maye is that 7-on-7, he's pretty damn good. He is. Again, what he did in the red zone 7-on-7 was awesome, extremely impressive. When the pass rush becomes involved, it's a little different. Now, he had a high completion percentage yesterday, and he did do a good job. And I wonder, if this gets the coaches excited, that he was able to find his outlets and know where they are and have, answers to there's pressure, there's not somebody open, like where do I go with the ball? It doesn't sound like a lot, but, I think to me it's impressive. I'd be interested to know if the coaches were that impressed with that. But, when he gets in when the pass rush is involved in its team, and again, he's playing with second team line, going against second team defense, you do see a lot more of his, I don't want to say his negatives, but certainly stuff that you're worried about, sort of like his hero ball. Like, there was one rep in particular. I think it was a third down, and he went deep right to, one of the tight ends, and he completely sprayed the ball. Yeah. And, what he did on that play was he went back, and I don't know how they're coaching him. I don't know if they told him, like, we're calling this play, just throw it to this guy no matter what. And that could be the case. But he dropped back, and he sort of just, he was just like flat-footed in the pocket, like waiting just to use his arm and whip it out there. And he did that, and the ball wasn't even close. And, like, that's the kind of stuff that you saw on film at North Carolina that you're like, they have to coach this stuff out of him, progressively. And so, I look at that stuff. He had another off-platform throw that was really good to Petway that he ended up dropping. I thought it was into a lot of coverage. I thought it was fortunate. He had another one where he rolled out, and it looked like, I think he threw another no-look pass, which was kind of cool. And so, there's the yin and yang with Drake, like, and you deal with this a lot with these athletic quarterbacks, whether it's, the Josh Allen types, the Justin Herberts, where, you love the off platform and how they just play naturally, but sometimes it gets them into trouble. And how do you balance that? I think that's an essential question with Drake. But, I thought he had a good day. Am I ready to say he was the best quarterback on the field? I don't know. I don't know how you say that when, in team, they largely didn't do much, and Jacoby Brissett had the only scoring drive. I thought Jacoby was fine. I thought he was efficient. I thought they were pretty even in my eyes. But again, I think that Drake to this point has been a 7-on-7 hero, and some of his flaws come up in team, and that's what I'll be watching going forward, whether it's Wednesday or into training camp.
To me, he's ahead of schedule, and maybe I had lower expectations for him than others, but I didn't think he'd be getting nearly as many snaps as Brissett until we're talking maybe, in training camp. I wanted to see this kind of a push in training camp, late July, you get into early August. So it seems like he's made a push sooner than I expected him to make, and we'll see if that continues. I just think we have to all understand who he is, his mentality. We've talked about it leading up to the draft, through the draft, after the draft. He's a gunslinger. He takes some chances. Those throws are going to happen, and we've got to live with those. We've got to live with those kinds of chances, and I think that's going to be a shock to the system for a lot of Patriots fans. You had Tom Brady, the greatest of all time, Mac Jones, who, towards the tail end, he took more chances because he just kind of lost his mind. But we're not really talking about Cam Newton couldn't necessarily throw the football consistently. So we haven't seen quarterbacks that are willing to take some of those like crazy risks. Tom would take them, but he was just so good. It was what it was. It's the greatest of all time. So it'll be interesting to see how fans deal with some of the risks that May is going to take, because I think we're going to have to live with those. There are going to be some of those turnovers. There are going to be some of those throws that are head scratchers, and you go, man, why do you take that risk? Why do you try to fit it there? And then there's going to be throws that he fits it there, and you go, oh my God, what a throw. So, like you said, the yin and the yang.
The Celtics are in the NBA Finals, and I can tell you, Nick is very excited. Celtics will have home court, so possibly 4 games at TD Garden. How awesome would it be to go to a game and experience that atmosphere and get to hate on Kyrie? Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat. I love that. I have to see the view from my seat before I purchase any tickets. It's right there in the app. And their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I was just looking at the app for Game 1 and saw a ton of discounts being offered. Like, seriously, it says, like, $49 off, $100 off. Of course, the price tags are expensive. Not outrageous if you're a hoop head and planning on going to the NBA Finals. Like I said, love getting a panoramic view from the seat in the app before I buy. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Purchase the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets. Lowest price. Guaranteed.
Let's get to the offensive line, Greg. Changes. You and I discussed Caden Wallace last week. Suddenly, we noticed he was on the right side, playing right tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, more the same. He was at right tackle again. Mike Onwenu, even more interesting, kicked into right guard for a time. What exactly is happening up front?
Well, again, Mayo before practice, we've talked about how he likes to sort of foreshadow things in our interactions, so far with him. So, he was asked about the offensive line and about, Wallace being on the right side and like, are you more of a, best five type of guy? And he said basically like, absolutely. And so, I'm a big proponent, and I don't overreact to stuff in mini camps or early in training camp because I'm a proponent of coaches taking a look at things and getting it on film and just saying like, hey, what do we think about this? I do find it interesting and a tad bit alarming that Caden Wallace now seems to be a right tackle. Maybe that has to do with, I'm sure they feel fine about a core four. Calvin Anderson and Tyrone Wheatley were the backup left tackles. Maybe they feel really good about Calvin Anderson. We'll see. That's sort of the role he filled with the Broncos before he got here, where, he started basically like a half a season or 2/3 of a season at left tackle due to injuries. And so that, maybe they like him there and he's a good swing tackle to have. But this goes back to the whole discussion that we had last week where, there's been so much made of their issues at left tackle, and that was with a core of four out and how bad the line was. And I will say, I don't think the line was that bad in this practice. And I don't remember a lot of pressure coming from the left side, core four. I remember more pressure coming from the right side or up the middle when there was in this practice. But, again, I like them taking a look at things, and maybe it's just a temporary thing. But the worry about going with Wallace at right tackle is not only like, they should have drafted a left tackle or somebody, everybody else in the NFL thinks that Wallace can't play the left side, and now he's a right tackle. Elliot Wolf says we think that he can do that, and then suddenly we're not in a training camp and he's not playing the left side anymore. It's, if they decide like they need to play their 3rd round pick and now they're kicking Onwenu inside, how does that mess up the formula when we talked about like, okay, their path forward for being a decent offensive line is Mike Onwenu is a Pro Bowl right tackle type, and they don't have to worry about that side, so they can help out the left side. Like they can deal with that. Now, if you have an uncertain left side and you have a rookie at right tackle, are you setting the course for disaster up front? Look, those are just the worries. Again, it's early. I don't mind them looking at things, but it will be very interesting to see the results that they see from looking at this stuff. And I think they're just looking at it to set the course for training camp. But there's a lot of dominoes fall if you decide to do X, Y, and Z up front.
I don't like playing Caden Wallace at right tackle at all if you want to move him to the left side. We talked about that last podcast. Don't need to pontificate it on this one or pontificate about it on this one. the Owenu stuff is also interesting, because you drafted Caden Wallace at the top of the third round. The idea was we can play him on the left side. If you can't play him on the left side, how much does it impact his value? I think it impacts his value to a point, but still, if you get a starting tackle in the third round, you can live with it. But then you had Owenu, who was supposed to be the right tackle. Now you're sliding him back to right guard. And the idea was to not flip-flop Owenu, that he was going to get a full camp. He was going to get a full offseason, a full preseason, joint practices. He was going to be able to devote 100% of his time at right tackle. He talked about it. Mayo talked about it. Elliott Wolf talked about it. Elliott Wolf just a couple of weeks ago called Mike Owenu the best tackle in free agency. And now here we are, first day of mandatory minicamp, and he's already splitting his brain between right guard and right tackle. I want him in one spot. We know he can play both. We know he can play guard. We know he can play tackle. Give the guy one responsibility. It's like every single year, whether it's Belichick, whether it's Patricia, whether it's, any of these offensive line coaches, Adrian Clem, Scott Peters, it's always flippy, floppy, floppy, flippy with Mike Owenu. Just put him somewhere, let the young man live there, commit himself to it, and be happy. Can we just do that? And so that's part of the issue to me, is that we're moving guys around. It's not like Owenu needs time at right guard to cross-train, quote unquote. We know he's a really good guard. So it's fascinating. I will say this, Greg, as disappointing as it would be to say the Caden Wallace left tackle experiment has already failed tremendously, if that's the case. I will say this, if he ain't good on the left side, if Scott Peters and Kugler don't think he can play on the left side, or he doesn't think he can play on the left side, it's best for him and the football team to keep him where he's comfortable. As much as it would be great to have him as a left tackle, if this guy, if it's on his side or the coach's side, and they've said he ain't good enough, I'd rather cut the cord early on the left side idea, get him back to his natural habitat, so to speak, and say, all right, young man, go to work and be good for us there. Because what you don't want, Greg, is to completely waste a third-round pick.
Yeah, and I also, part of this whole calculation is now it makes you wonder, do they not like what they have at right guard? With Nick Leverett was there the other day, Layden Robinson backed him up, the rookie. Of course, Mafi is having to play more center without Jake Andrews out there. How does he fit into it? I think that Andrews is too undersized to play guard, but we'll see when he gets back and healthy. But it's just as soon as I saw that in practice, I almost got an instant headache. We're already doing this stuff. Are they already looking at this stuff, without even pads on and saying we're not good enough at right guard, or Wallace can't play the left side, so he's a third round pick, so we got to find a place to play him. This stuff just it really worries me. I was hopeful that we were beyond it. I was not sounding the alarm bells of the offensive line, and I'm not now, but my worry meter is definitely up on the offensive line.
I think we all agree on this before we move on to a quick 4 up, 4 down. I think we all agree on this overall idea. Just get it right. As disappointing as it might be that, you had to move Owenu to right guard, back to right guard, and you had to move Wallace or keep Wallace at right tackle. And if you get the best 5 on the offensive line by week 1, and these guys are at least good, then that's fine. That's the ultimate goal. As irritating and frustrating as it can be, and again, as they might have missed some of these evaluations, maybe, especially with Wallace, maybe with Robinson, as Greg just mentioned, if they have a good offensive line this year, then I don't think any of us will go back bitching about what happened in June. All right, minicamp.
I will
practice.
say one last thing on that, Nick. I will say, if they move Michael Owenu to right guard, that is a pricey right guard. At 19 million AAV. I mean, it's almost the top of the market. Lindstrom is at 20.5. Robert Hunt is at 20, which I think was a crappy contract by the Panthers. Zach Martin is at 18.5 million, and Owenu's at 19. If they kick him inside, like you said about Wolf saying, we think we got the best tackle on the market. That's a pricey guard, boy.
I would counter and say that's not necessarily on Onwenu, right? Like he could have played tackle. He could have played tackle. It's, out of necessity. If he moves back to guard, it's because they couldn't get Caden Wallace to work out. So it goes back to the misevaluation. If you didn't know who you would be drafting at the time you signed Onwenu to that contract extension, obviously, because of what Onwenu said, Wolf and Mayo said, the plan was absolutely Mike Onwenu right tackle. So I'm not going to kill him about the contract because at the time they were thinking he's going to be our right tackle. The blame really would go down to Caden Wallace and the misevaluation of him being able or capable of playing on the left side and drafting the wrong guy, which led you to move Onwenu back to guard because, as you said, Greg, you got to find a spot for Wallace now. He's a top of the third round pick. And you think he's at least good, then you want to get him out there and you say to yourself, well, we don't want Wallace sitting on the bench if he's one of our top 5 offensive linemen. So he's not going to play guard. He ain't playing left tackle. His big ass certainly ain't playing center. So best option is let's put him at right tackle where he's happy, and let's put Big Mike back at right guard. So we'll see if it works. All right, 4 up from yesterday's minicamp practice.
So my number 1 up was Jalen Polk, the rookie wide receiver. I've been talking about him more and more. He had a couple of really nice touchdowns. Like I said last week, Polk is one of these guys that the more you get to watch him, the more you appreciate him, the more you like him, the more comfortable he is in what they're doing. Like, to me, he looked like a veteran out there. And I love what I see out of Jalen Polk so far. Number 2, I had a core for at left tackle. And again, this isn't scientific because there's only so much you can watch at practice. But I thought that as opposed to what we saw in the 2 practices where he wasn't there, I thought things settled down a lot more on the offensive line. I didn't feel like as much pressure came from the left side. It was more the right side and up the middle at times. So I thought he did a nice job. I thought Drake Maye was in my 4 up. I thought he did a nice job. I thought he was good in this practice. I do think there's some context to that, which we talked about previously. And my 4th up was Joey Sly, the kicker who went a little kicker talk, who went 4 for 4 with his opportunities in practice.
Let's talk about the not so great. You're 4 down.
Antonio Mafi. And look, I understand. I respect that he's playing out of position. You also have to remember this is a guy that not too long ago was playing defensive line in college. And then all of a sudden now he's playing offensive line in the NFL. And now he's having to snap the ball. But I got to tell you, I am just so sick of watching him snap the ball back to Drake Maye. I mean, I will give credit to Drake Maye that a lot of, what he's doing, he has to do it with these freaking balloon ball snaps and wide and high. And like, they're all over the place. And like, I'm so sick of watching Mafi snap the ball that, I feel a little bit bad about it, but not that much. Tyquan Thornton, he did have a touchdown at one point, but he had a drop on the first play of the game, first play of team that really just stuck in my mind because it was just, he ran this quick slant. There was traffic in there. And I don't want to say he got alligator arms, but I do think maybe he took his eyes off the ball. And again, there aren't pads out there or anything, but I got the impression that he didn't like being in there. And that sort of, I don't want to say he lacks toughness, but just maybe there's you just worry about that he doesn't like to play inside. He doesn't like to play the physical game, and he's just a perimeter player. And like, I don't think the Patriots, I don't think this offense, the way they construct it, I don't think that's a player for them. So you worry about it. Hunter Henry. I love Hunter Henry. I love watching him operate. This was just sort of, I got to the end of practice and I'm looking through my notes and like, I don't remember much from Hunter Henry. And, he's out there a lot. Is he having trouble getting open? Is he losing a step? those are sort of the thoughts that come to mind, even though I do think he's very valuable for this team, even if he has lost a step. Because you do see the other tight ends, not as much Hooper, but Jaheim Bell, LaMichael Petway. These guys are getting the ball all the time. They're involved in a lot of stuff, but Hunter Henry is like, there's basically like crickets. And then the fourth down would be your guy Chad Ryland, who was 2 for 4 on his kicks. So the competition is afoot.
Moved up in the 4th round for that guy. Well, we got to get to Damien Harris's roast job of the 2022 situation. We'll get to that in a second. But first, episode brought to you by Prize Picks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the app today. Use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. And also check out the guys over at BSJ for the year. $50 it costs for the year. That's 50. And Bedard Giardi crushing the Patriots beat. As always, John Corrales giving you all the information that you need and want. The breakdowns of the Celtics as they're 2 games away, 2 wins away from an NBA title. So check them out, $50 for the year. All right, Damien Harris went in on Belichick, Greg, on the Athletic Football Show podcast. There's a lot here. I'm going to read a couple of comments, then I'll get your thoughts, then read a couple more comments and get your thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. Let's start here. What happened to Mac Jones in New England was not because of Mac Jones. What happened was because you took away an offensive coordinator who coached him to be a Pro Bowler and almost coached us to winning our division with a rookie quarterback in his first year. And then you take Matt Patricia, who's coached defenses his entire life, and Joe Judge, who has been a special teams coach, coached receivers at some point, and then you just throw them in there and be like, hey, coach, this kid up. He's a first-round pick. But as long as you teach him what I say, everything will be fine, and bleep wasn't fine. Any thoughts up to this point on what Damien Harris had to say?
No, I thought, Damien Harris basically echoed a lot of our discussions, a lot of my reporting the whole time. And I think he spoke the truth. I mean, he's definitely an Alabama guy and he's a MAC guy. So there's a little of that, but I still think I've always found Damien Harris to be very direct. He doesn't BS. Like, he'll just tell you the truth. And I think that got him into trouble here. I think, I don't know if I put the quotes in there, but there was, because I listened to the interview, and there was a part where he talked about, like, he couldn't hold his tongue anymore about how, like, they were just about to play a preseason game. And he basically spoke up, and he talked about his running back coach. And I wasn't sure. I think it was Ivan Fears still, but Damien Harris was just like, what the hell are we doing? Like, we have a game in like 3 days. We don't know how to do jack crap. And like, whether it was the running backs coach or Patricia, he said basically like the blowback was shut the F up and like do your job. And like, I think, we talked about like why Damien Harris wasn't back and at the time, and some of it was durability and his injury history and things like that. But I do think a lot of it, and we said it at the time, I do think of it like he was one of the malcontents behind the scenes who didn't like what was going on, knew stuff was effed up, said it was effed up internally, a little bit externally. And I think that, Belichick systematically tried to push those guys out of the building.
And Kendrick Bourne was another one. And he was in the doghouse all 2022 and had to come back with the tail between the legs to play last year. Harris also said this: it's like the breath of Mac Jones in New England. It came, it went, and it shouldn't have gone the way that it went. And the only reason that it did is because Bill Belichick, being stuck in his ways, was very much like, as long as I am here, as long as I am, along with Robert Kraft, the top dog of this organization, no matter who, no matter where, what position, where they coach, whatever, we will have success. It was a debacle. Harris did acknowledge that he understood why Belichick did what he did. He said he needs full-on control. That's just the kind of guy Bill Belichick is. But at the same time, can you blame him? Because in the 20 years where he had full control, he had a lot of success, so you can't blame him. I think Damien Harris here is just, he's being very accurate. I don't have any issue what he said. He's no longer a Patriot. He has the freedom to go out there and rip what he wants to rip. I think a lot of people agree with his assessment of 2022, how things went down, how things went wrong. And I also think what he said at the end there about Belichick in 20 years, it is true. Like, and you and I said this a lot, Greg. Belichick deserved to really dig his own grave. And because of what he did, the 6 titles, the greatest coach of all time. And Greg, in my estimation, he dug his own grave because of how he handled the offense, the personnel moves, all that stuff. He more dug his own grave as GM Belichick, but he's unwilling, and Harris says it there. He's unwilling to cede any power because he's so successful for a couple of decades. He's going to live by what he believes in and what he does. And at the end of the day, Greg, that was his undoing in New England.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the only thing, and I thought Damien was spot on with all of his comments. I don't think that there was anything that I would really, point to and be like, I don't know about that. Or that's kind of like, he's just mad at the Patriots, mad at Belichick for the way things ended. The only thing I'm waiting for is I hope my guy Femi Abemefe asks Mike Lombardi about these quotes on the GM shuffle, because Mike, who I love, and I think he's great. I listen to all his podcasts. I think he's one of the smartest football men I've been around. He's a friend. He's obviously very defensive about Bill Belichick, as we all know. And so, I hope Femi asks Mike about these comments, because I would really like to hear the rebuttal, because I think there's a lot of truth here.
The Johnny Cochran of the Bill Belichick defense team, Mike Lombardi. God rest Johnny Cochran. He's Greg. I'm Nick. We're out of here. Talk to you later in the week.